joining me on this very special edition of the News are Ellis, the High Commissioner from Britain in India. You've spent 2.5 years in India in this current stint.
Correct.
Alex, what do you think about India?
It's a wonderful country. I lived here a long time ago when I was 18 for a year. And in some ways, it's changed so much since then. It is obviously incredibly diverse. It's incredibly stimulating. You meet the most interesting people. And it's a country on the move. I always say to people when they say, what's India like? I said, come and see it, and you'll see tomorrow.
You said that the right time for India's presidency of the G20 is right now. Why do you say that? Because
India has a lot of power and growing power. It has the power of attraction to bring the world to India, and it can show something of India to the world. We just had the moon landings, remarkable achievement by the whole of India. We have what India is doing on digital payments, for example, another thing which is fascinating British ministers when they come here. So that's why I think it's the right time. I really admire the way as well that India's gone about its G20 presidency with high ambition and also showing all of the fantastic diversity within India. And so we've had 16 ministers here, and they love it. They're fascinated to see not the cliche of India, which is sometimes portrayed overseas, but the reality of India today.
And what is the reality of India that you see from your eyes? Because international newspapers often put out a point of view that's not very complimentary to India.
I haven't noticed the media being too complimentary about most things, but I would say that the reality of India is opportunity and aspiration. And you see that in my Indian colleagues, you see that everywhere I go, and I travel across the country. It's our biggest diplomatic network in the world is here in India, as well as the diversity which we saw from when I went to the Andaman Islands at the start of the G20 presidency last November, I think, through to Lakshadweep, through to Gandhinagar, all over the place. You see what India has to offer, as well as having these incredibly deep-rooted traditions.
What do you think about the G20 summit that will be taking place next week? There have been disagreements. Consensus is eluding. Even the trade ministers meet did not come out with a communique. There is an elephant in the room as far as the Ukraine-Russia conflict is concerned. How hopeful are you that problems will be addressed and we will have something really concrete coming out of this summit?
Of Prime Minister Modiji's wisdom and determination, I am very hopeful. What's harder is that whereas at this last Leaders' Summit in Bali less than a year ago, Russia would accept consensus, now it refuses to do so and has refused to accept the Bali consensus in every one of India's G20 ministerial meetings so far. And that's our problem. An autocracy has invaded its democratic neighbour and is taking its land. And that is something which we have to call out. It shouldn't be an elephant. It should be explicit in the room that that is not okay. What's also frustrating, and I really share the Indian government's frustration in this, is that we want the G20 to be also focusing on some of the biggest global challenges. Now, India can make a huge contribution to those alone, just as India, but also can bring the world together behind those challenges. Number one would be global economic growth, which is sluggish, not in India, but elsewhere. And number two would be development, and in particular health, for example. Number three would be sustainability. And these are things which the world needs to address, and which we saw actually the world address 2 years ago in the Glasgow Climate Change Conference, with many thanks actually to Prime Minister Modiji exactly for the announcements, the ambitious announcements he made. But now is the time to be looking at those again. But the truth is that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has a direct and harmful effect on dealing with those challenges. To give one example, Russia has walked away from the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which was designed to enable grain to flow from the Black Sea to the rest of the world. It's actually stopping that from happening. What does that mean? That means higher food inflation all over the world, including in India. It means grain not getting to the poorest of the world. So you're right, it's an elephant in the room, but we need to point at it and realize that unfortunately it's having serious consequences for the bigger development agenda, which we all want to aim for.
India has its own problems with China as far as border issues are concerned. How do you think a forum like the G20 can actually work out a consensus, because these large superpowers are on the high table, and unless everybody gets together, there is going to be no forward movement, and the developing world will suffer the most.
I agree with that.
What is that magic potion that we can come up with between now and next week?
Yeah, I agree with you that it is an unruly high table at the moment for the reasons which you've given. Prime Minister Modiji is pretty good at producing the Amrit necessary to find the answers. I just know the United Kingdom and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will absolutely be supporting him in how you go about doing that. Because at the same time as the world is quite fractured, you have these global problems which are not going away. Some of the solutions are national, but on an issue like climate change, we've got to do this internationally. That requires us, I think, both to be at times tough about our own security, protect ourselves, just as India is doing, as the UK is doing, and also at the same time engage. And it's quite a difficult balance to strike, I think, for each government. But in the end, we've only got one world, and we have to find some solutions. And the G20 should be providing the political will to find those solutions.
I also want to ask you, there are a lot of hopes on the India-UK trade deal. How soon do you think that's going to be inked, and do you think substantial progress has been made?
As you know, our trade minister was here last week. She had some excellent meetings with Minister Goyal and Minister Sitaraman. As she said, we're getting towards the final part of this negotiation. But I'm going to be frank with you, I think the final part will be very tough. The FTA is a way to achieve ends. And what is the end? The end is to enable greater growth and greater employment through greater trade and greater investment between our two countries. There's an enormous advantage to that economically, and I think strategically as well, going back to the conversation we've just had. But that takes some lena dena on both sides. And I think we're getting into some pretty tough areas now. So I have to be frank, I think this is going to take a lot of work.
And time?
We can work very hard if we need to. And the Indian government works extremely hard. So let's concentrate on getting the substance right before the schedule.
There is a statement of yours that I'd like to pick up. When you spoke about the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, his Indian origin, I mean, he's almost treated as he's our guy there. And you said that, and he even says things like Jai Siya Ram. And you said that, did you ever imagine one day a person staying in 10 Downing Street on August 15th would say Jai Shri Ram? Lord Curzon would have choked. How do you see the progress across the world about the earlier geopolitical situations and the world becoming actually one family today?
Sure, and you're quite right to correct me. He did say Jai Siya Ram. I think it's a remarkable thing to have somebody called Rishi Sunak in number 10 Downing Street, somebody who lights deer, outside Downing Street. And when there were Rangoli, I think, when he was finance minister, drawing Rangoli on Downing Street, tells you something about the UK of today. Quite a different UK, even from the UK which I was growing up in a generation ago. Just as India has changed so much in some ways, the UK has changed a lot. You have a more diverse world, I think. You have a world of different perspectives now, but you're going to need those different perspectives and the ability to reconcile them, because some of the, as we were saying before, two of the great tendencies, I think, of the next 10 years will be both the fracturing of the world in some ways, but the necessity of the world addressing some of its biggest problems, which we mentioned climate change. I could talk about preparation for a new pandemic as well, where India is particularly well placed. And I'd like to think that my Prime Minister, who is as British as I am, can also bring the perspective, because he knows India very well, to be able to understand the approach of different countries and to be able to address it in different ways. I wouldn't want to make this exclusively just about our Prime Minister. Our Foreign Secretary's mother's from Sierra Leone. Our Home Secretary comes from heritage, including from Goa, if I'm not mistaken. And that's happening more and more around the world. So I think it's a different sort of a world than the one we were in before. That's including by reflecting in the kind of relative shifts of power towards India, because I think India will be one of the 3 defining countries the rest of my life. So we're all going to have to understand India.
I'm very fascinated with your social media, your Twitter timeline, or rather X timeline, talks about a new word that you learned just about a couple of weeks ago, which was chugli, and then you're trying to discover the difference between chugli and gupshup. So, have you figured out the difference between the two?
So I have two theories on this. One is it's one of those irregular verbs you used to have to learn at school, which is me gupshup karta hu. So I gossip, lekin aap chungli karte hai. So I think my gupshup is somebody else's chungli. Chugli. Thank you. There's no although I notice some people do put a little dot beneath it, but clearly grammatically wrong.
No, chugli.
And I have a nasty feeling that men like to claim that they do gupshup and that women do chugli. But I'm not sure that's fair either.
Yes, that's the men's view of the world,
male view of the world.
Not at all endorsed by the women.
I agree. I think I'm with the women on this one.
Yeah, absolutely, that's the right place to be in, with the women, supporting the women by their side. Never opposite them. And are you impressed with Bollywood? You're a great musician as well. So have you picked up some folk songs or Bollywood songs or anything? And can you just, before I end the show, just show us how Indian you are, and our viewers would love it.
I do. I love Bollywood. I remember watching Bollywood films when I lived in Indore a generation ago and loving them then. And there's a fantastic energy about it. Also, interestingly, they have a lot of connects with the UK, a lot of talented actors who go and perform all over the world. Great music as well. I think that it's not a coincidence that the Oscar was won for a song from an Indian film. So I'm not sure your viewers would actually like me to sing, but I am a huge fan of the different kinds of music as well. I was, A.R. Rahman, I went to listen to him saying that's Dil Se Re. He's a wonderful musician. But also the classics are also are wonderful as well. I remember I was learning the other day, O Gore Gore, O Banke Chore, Meri Gali Aaya Karo. You have this wonderful range of songs. It's also quite good for my Hindi because I learned a few new words, although some of the words I'm not sure are necessarily that useful. Anchal. I'm not sure if I'm going to use Anchal again.
Anchal is just there. Brilliant. So, somebody who's enjoying the flavor of India and somebody who appreciates the flavor of India, well, that is why the theme of this G20 is Vasudevam Kutumbakam. The whole world is one family, and happy to have you enjoy India, and happy, I think that India is extremely happy to host the G20, and we do hope that we come out with some positives and some concrete takeaways from this G20. Thank you very much, Mr. Ellis, for joining me on this very special interview.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You were watching the News Hour at 9. Stay tuned.